Friends, we are at the top of the hour. Welcome. It's Dr. Marcia McFee in the Worship Design Studio, and I'm so glad to spend this time with you talking about the Advent Christmas season coming up. I know it's September, my friends, but as we've been waiting to come on, we have had Christmas music playing because it's time for those of us who design worship to get in the mood to think about and plan how we will present this life-giving message of God's inbreaking into the world through the human and the divine, through this newborn babe, the way that we wait and anticipate the fullness of God breaking in upon our lives again and again. So I got into my Christmas stuff in my closet this morning, and I got out some garlands, some of my viney stuff. So if you got anything around there to get you in the mood, go right ahead. I'm going to put this over here. Let my little monk statue hold that for us. But welcome to the webinar. We've got several things that we're going to do today. 4 things, basically. I'm going to give you some tips for what I call an good season. And good means meaningful and memorable. So I'm going to give you some tips. I've got 3 C's for you. And then we're going to talk about the season, about the theology of the season, a little tiny bit about the history of the season. We're going to go around, talk about lectionary, what's coming up in the lectionary for those of you who follow the Revised Common Lectionary or the narrative lectionary, but we're also going to talk about non-lectionary ideas. And then finally, I'll let you know what we're doing in the studio, what we have in the studio. Some of you are Worship Design Studio members, and so you'll be able to go in and see right away what resources you can draw from us. And those of you who are not members of the Worship Design Studio, there are several ways to actually get to use some of our resources if you'd like to. Towards the end of the podcast webinar, I will be giving you a coupon code, a promo code for Worship Design Studio if you'd like to join us. But you can also get some of our materials other ways, and I'll let you know. But the point is to get you thinking about what will be the right thing for your congregation for this year. So let's get started. So tips for an good season. Meaningful and memorable is important to me in the Worship Design Studio. I teach about it in terms of meaningful in the ways that the faith story and our life story intersect. It's at that intersection that we really find meaning, and we learn to live our lives in a way that brings a depth of experience and purpose to our lives. That's why we follow a spiritual path, so that we might have a model for our lives to live in a meaningful way that creates a better world. Memorable, meaningful and memorable, means that we offer worship that will stick in our minds, live in our bodies, and we're going to talk just a moment about how we do that. So let's look at that. So the first C, I have 3 C's for you, is context. What will be inspiring for this year for this community? That is your biggest job, because there are many, many resources that you can draw on, but your job, and the one I can't do for you, is to discern what would be the most poignant for your community this year. You know, it may be that your community has gone through a certain kind of thing recently. You know, maybe you are on the East Coast and you just went through a hurricane and floods, and the message of hope and God with us could be the most important thing. Maybe you're not affected by that weather, but maybe you've been affected by some sort of grief in your community, or perhaps you've been affected by the fact that things are changing and people are uncomfortable with change. Or maybe you're super aware of the divisions in our country, and that's something that's really you're hyper aware of that in your community. So let me just say that for myself, when I create things in the Worship Design Studio, because I'm not creating for one specific congregation, I'm trying to look at sort of the global scene and what's happening on the global scene in a broader context. And so this year, I went with Silent Night, one of the most beloved hymns of the Advent Christmas season, is turning 200 this year. 200 years ago, that beautiful song was created on the spur of the moment, last minute, for a Christmas Eve service when the organ had quit. The organ was broken, and they needed to write a song that they could use for guitar. And that was written in the spur of the moment, and it has spread since then across the world and has become a most beloved hymn. Now, one of the most famous stories attached to that is the one of just a little over 100 years ago in World War I, the occurrence of the Christmas truce and the story of the British and German soldiers on the front line that called a Christmas truce, and in that peace and quiet, calm and bright of the Christmas truce could hear each other singing Silent Night, each in their own language. Such a beautiful story. And so that's the direction I went when I asked myself about context, because I think we're living in a time where many of us are hyper-vigilant, hyper-aware of the divisions that exist within our world, within our country, within our churches, even within our families. And so to remember that there is a way to peace, that the Prince of Peace came to help us to understand each other, to find those times where we can listen to one another, even if we don't agree. We can listen and we can find some calm and bright, peace and light in the season. And so that's the context that I went for this year as I designed worship for the Advent Christmas season. I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go along. But for you, you're going to ask yourself, what is the most important thing for us to address? Maybe that is what I just described was something that would resonate with you, and maybe something else. So as we go along in this webinar, and I tell you about the theology of the season, a little bit about the history, keep thinking about what is it for you, for your context, that would be the most important message to offer. So the second C in our tips for an good season is communication. Effective communication means that we ask ourselves the question, how will we engage everyone in some way in a sensory-rich expression? Now, sensory-rich expression is something that I teach in the Worship Design Studio all the time. Those of you who've studied with me know this. Those of you who read my book, Think Like a Filmmaker, know that what I understand about the way that we learn and remember is that we don't all do it the same. We don't all learn and remember, take in information in the same way. And so what we need are many different ways to bring the message. So I use Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences theory to talk about how each of us is wired in our brains in different ways. And the message is only going to come to us, be communicated effectively, most effectively, if we are looking at different ways to bring the message. So some people are very word-oriented, verbal linguistic, and the words are going to be very important to them. But I'm sorry to tell you, preachers out there, that's not the only way that the message comes to folks. And sometimes it's harder for people to get the message just through the verbal alone. Many people are going to get it through the music. And so if the music is enriching and undergirding and supporting and bringing the message, then that is going to be an effective way for those folks to get the message. Some of us are looking for the connections between things, that logical way of thinking. Do the prayers connect with the hymns, connect with the sermon, connect with the anthem? Does it fit together as a whole? They're going to be looking for that. And when that happens, oh, that's so lovely, right? Some people are more visual spatial. And oh my goodness, they love both visual spatial and bodily kinesthetic. They love the Advent season because we typically light an Advent wreath, and we get to see that. We get to see it, we get to feel it. We get so many different ways to see that message. And so sometimes the Advent Christmas season is a favorite for these folks because the sanctuary changes visually and we get to do something. So that doing is important for some. And then that interpersonal, that interaction, as well as the intrapersonal, which is going inward and reflecting and quiet reflecting and meditative, maybe even silence. So this is a really quick way of saying, friends, that we are wired in different ways. And this is something, the bedrock of what I teach in the Worship Design Studio is if we understand this about our brains, then we can use the verbal arts, the music arts, the visual arts, the media arts, the dramatic arts. We can use all of those to bring the message, and we can more effectively communicate that message and touch people's lives, which in turn helps them to touch the lives of people out in the world. So Communication. That's another way to have a good season, is to really focus in on all of the worship arts and how that message is going to come alive. So in our Calm and Bright series that we're celebrating 200 years of Silent Night, let me just give you an example of how that happens when I design worship. I come up with what I call an anchor image, a visual that is going to, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so for this series, the light or the star is going to be the anchor image, the color palette, golds, blues, and purples, and silvers. Those shining things, right? So the message is to bring the light into the world, how that light shone into the world, both metaphorically and literally in that star shining bright, guiding people to this great good news. So that anchor image is a star, and we have created many different ways that folks who are doing this series will create stars with lights in them. There's so many out there these days. Maybe the Advent wreath is made up of candles that are in star candle holders. So many different ways that star will show up. We create a Pinterest page that has all kinds of things in it, all kinds of ideas. So we give you a ton of ideas, and of course, you'll come up with your own. But this is what I'm talking about, friends, no matter what series you do, whether it's our Calm and Bright or one of our other ones or your own. One of the very first things to do is to find a good anchor image, and then that will give you all sorts of ideas of ways to bring in all of the worship arts, all of the senses. We've got other ways that people can do the star kind of thing to bring in different generations. So I love this picture that Jenna, my project manager, found. Don't you love it, the way these people are making a star with their fingers? How fun is that? You could get your youth involved in taking pictures of the congregation. Some youth would love to lay down on the ground, and take a shot up through these people's fingers. And you could post those all over social media, #BeAStar. One of the things I love about this star image is that we live in such a celebrity culture, and we're dealing with that in a intense way right now, right? Our obsession with celebrity and the trouble that gets us into in some ways. And so Be a Star can be reframed. How are we a star? It's not about celebrity status. It's about the light we bring into the world. So #BeAStar, #Keep Calm and Shine On, #Calm and Bright could be all kinds of ways, but getting people involved in that social media, call it evangelism, call it publicity, call it getting the message out, whatever you want to, but that's a really fun thing. And Shelley Walters, another one of my associates, came up with a wonderful idea of an at-home Advent wreath with battery-operated tea lights and star cutouts that families can do during the week. And she has created a whole way of drawing in some of the liturgical pieces, some of the prayer responses that we have on for Sunday mornings, drawing that into during the week, because we wanted this series to be really generational, multi-generational friendly. And so the responses in the worship itself are rhyming and simple, so that children over time, because they repeat, will be able to memorize and learn them and repeat them back, especially if they're doing it at home during the week. So this is what I mean by, how do we get more people involved in the communication of the message, not just on Sunday morning, but also in other places in their lives and other times during the week? This is what reinforces the message and gets the message out beyond the time and place of worship. Not only that, one of the things that I think it makes a really meaningful and memorable season is how we address that message in small groups. So all of our fully scripted series in the Worship Design Studio, we create small group resources to go with it, or we connect it with an already existing book, that kind of thing. And this season, we decided instead of a book study, we would have small groups get together and do activities of putting mission kits together. And we give lots of ideas, hospital care kits. People are in the hospital over the Advent season, Christmas season, cancer care kits, folks who are sitting and getting treatments, first responder care packages to take to firehouses and that kind of thing over the season. Really wonderful way to get people involved. Now, one of the things that we'll see in just a moment is that these care packages then get brought to the worship either in a representative way or all of them, and so that we see the connection between our worship and mission. So this, I'm just using this as an example of what we've done for the Calm and Bright series, but the point is, no matter what series you do, if you're creating your own, to find a way to connect mission and connect what we do on Sunday morning. That also ups the communication of the message. So we've had context, we've had communication in two ways to have an good season. All right, third and last C is continuity. How will we create anticipation and familiarity while offering something unique? This is the balancing act, isn't it? This is the balancing act. So we want to do something that's unique, that wakes us up to the story yet again, but we also want to have that familiarity. We want folks to feel like, this is my church, this is my connection, and even more than that, after the first Sunday thinking, oh my gosh, this is so wonderful. I want so-and-so to come and experience this. I want to invite them. And you want some continuity from Sunday to Sunday so that when you do invite somebody the next Sunday, it's as wonderful as it was the first Sunday. So those of you who study with me know that I teach about something called threads. And threads are those things that repeat throughout the season, that give the season its flavor. It might be a unique way of opening the service. It might be a unique way of praying during the service. It might be a thread song, something that repeats like a theme song. So let me just give you an example. In our Calm and Bright series, what I call the threshold moment is that movement from the ordinary and sort of the welcome and announcement-y time into introducing the theme, introducing the spiritual journey that we're about to go on, and getting ourselves immersed in the message and the spiritual journey. So at the beginning of every service during the Advent series for Calm and Bright, there's the welcome and announcements, and then I can imagine, if you have a space where you can dim the lights a little bit, I can see the lights dimming just a little bit. And then in the script, the pastor says, I invite you to deep breath. Right away, that's a threshold, right? That letting go. And then the pastor says, imagine that what is above you is a starlit night. And then some handbells or chimes, you can even use little children's handbells, begin to ring. It's the sonic representation of twinkling stars, right? Bing, 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 right? And then what you say is, and in this moment, all is calm, all is bright. Now, I just led a retreat, a worship planning retreat. And because we just created this, my music collaborator, Chuck Bell, and I, we tried this out for the first time. And oh my gosh, it was so magical. But it also gave us that sense of, listen with a new way of listening and with intention, alertness, right? Rather than let us stand for our call to worship, right? So, and then we created this little song that's going to be a theme thread song at the beginning. It was the night when peace was born, and then people just sing that silent night. And just as now the world was torn, holy night. We're not going to sing the whole song because we want to wait for Christmas Eve, but we're going to get that just a little teaser, right? So that opening will be the same for all of the Sundays. That's the continuity part, right? So you know that that's going to, but the little thing that will change, it was the night when hope was born, when love was born, when joy was born, right? So as we go through peace, love, hope, joy. So there's a little tweaking, but there's something that creates continuity. That's what I mean by continuity, because then, 2 times, you repeat it, once, you have 2 Sundays, and it feels like ritual then. It feels familiar. And that's the beauty of doing a series. It helps you have both the unique and also the familiar at the same time. So as I said, these mission kits for this series are going to get processed up, and the manger is going to be present the whole time, the whole Advent, so that bringing of the gifts, it kind of forecasts the story of the wise people bringing their gifts, right? But we keep bringing these gifts of these mission kits that we put together week by week by these small groups, and that's part of the ritual as well. So these things that repeat, that offer continuity. During prayer, we're going to light candles in prayer stations, on tables. And this is so we can have that candle lighting sense without actually doing the the Christmas Eve candle lighting. We want to save that for Christmas Eve, right? But we still get to light candles every Sunday as part of that. So finding those things that help you get familiar, are repeated patterns that bring continuity. So that's my 3 C's for an good, meaningful, and memorable Advent Christmas season: context, communication, and continuity, with those examples from our newest series. But we're going to now get into all the possibilities, not just what I've been doing, but let's talk about the season of Advent Christmas so that you can do that discerning of what you are going to do for your community. So by the 3rd century, friends, in the 3rd century church, the church has 3 big days, but Christmas is not one of them. I know, it's like, what? 300 years after the birth of Christ, we still don't have a day on which, a special, only this day, only this thing. Now, Epiphany. So Epiphany predates the celebration of Christmas. And it was a unitive celebration of the birth, of the Magi visit, of Jesus' baptism, of changing the water into wine at Cana. That's a lot in one celebration, right? So, but Epiphany was a much more important date for the early church for a very long time. Unfortunately, what has happened for us in our culture is that Christmas feels like the culmination of Advent, and then Epiphany is not as important to at least Protestant Christians. Orthodox Christians, it's still very, very much an important day. But that 12 days of Christmas, right? It's not 12 days of Christmas preceding, it's post-Christmas. There's 12 days between Christmas Day and Epiphany. And so that kind of gets lost a little bit. We're going to address that in just a moment. Some of you have been practicing an extended Advent, and that's kind of a modern day answer to the loss of the understanding of the Christmas season itself. And the importance of that. But hold on to that just a moment, and I will address that. So by the 4th century, then, when Christianity is legal, it's all the rage, that one-day Epiphany has developed into many more commemorations. By the 4th century, we have Advent, we have Christmas, a day on which Christmas is celebrated. We have the Feast of Jesus' Circumcision. It got cut out. Okay. We don't really do that much anymore. The day of Epiphany, the presentation of Jesus in the temple, and later baptism of the Lord becomes a big celebration at that time as well. So post-Epiphany. Now, Advent actually begins not as preparation for Christmas, but as a preparation for people to be baptized on Epiphany. So it's like an intensive time of catechism for people who are going to be baptized on Epiphany, because Epiphany was much more important than Christmas to begin with, right? So that Advent begins as that longer season on its way to Epiphany, not on its way to Christmas. Now, the date of the Christmas computation, we first see that, or have evidence of that, celebrated in Rome in the 4th century. There are various theories about how the date of Christmas got landed on. Some say that it was there to sort of overlay or usurp the winter solstice, the pagan winter solstice date. Others say that there's a possible theory out there that ancient peoples believed that the date of your death was also the date of your conception, right? And so if you go backwards from December 25th, 9 months, you get Good Friday time. So that's another interesting theory. The truth is that we don't have any documentation to really nail that down. Very interesting theories, but we will never know. unless something, definitive comes along. But does it matter? Probably not. So Advent as a season of preparation for Christmas is fully established by the 6th or 7th century. And that was a movable, someplace it was 4 Sundays, someplace it was 5, someplace it was 7, actually. But by Pope Gregory in the 11th century, they settled on 4. All right, so Advent, Christmas. Let's look at its theology connected to our human yearning. We might call that our soteriology, which is a fancy theological word for who are we and what do we care about and what moves us and why do we do the things we do out of who we are in our human nature. So for me, Advent Christmas season really points toward the yearning of the presence of the mysterious, something beyond, something more, something planted and born within us. So there is this, I think, human yearning for new life, continued new life, right? Being born or having something birthed in your life, renewed in your life is a constant, I think, for us. And I think that presence of the mysterious, presence of the holy, presence of God in our lives, to reconnect with that in a way that it's born in us again, I think is a very human need. And so I think that one of the reasons why the Advent Christmas season is so near and dear to us is not just nostalgia, although I think sentimentality may play into it a little bit if we're just super honest. But it's also because we have this deep human yearning to feel the presence of the holy in our lives, to reconnect with that, for that to be born within us. So I think that's something to take into account. And because of that, perhaps a question we could ask ourselves is, what will the Spirit birth in this church, this year, this time in history, this time in the history of our church? What needs to be born? What are we yearning to have born? What will the Spirit birth in us anew this year? Do we need the birth of peace, right? That's kind of what the Calm and Bright series really focuses on. Do we need the birth of renewed hope? Do we need the birth of healing? Do we need the birth of renewed relationships? What is it in your community that needs to be birthed again, that you could focus on and invite people to see that happening in their lives? Okay, so friends, let's take a look at, in light of those things about the season, about the theology, let's look at non-lectionary and lectionary. So starting with non-lectionary, because if we're going to do something not connected to already prescribed scripture, what has to hold it together is that theological theme, that undergirding. So let's just take a look at some of those theological themes that actually come out in the typical or traditional scriptures and the story of our faith narrative around Advent Christmas. So Adventus literally means the coming of Christ, the coming of the Anointed One, the coming of the Holy into human history. So incarnation, our faith is an incarnational faith. God wanted to be with us in such a meaningful and tangible way that God came in human form to show us perhaps not how to be more spiritual, but how to be more human, right? To show us what it means to be in right relationship, to show us what it means to have real power, and that's not in might, but in relationship, in peace and mercy and justice and lifting up the oppressed. So that incarnation, the meeting of the human and divine, what does it mean to be followers of Jesus Christ, who showed us how to be fully human and how to understand the divinity within us as well, as children of God? So incarnation, the entrance of light where there is no light. Friends, this is as ancient as humanity itself. This yearning for the light. And so that's one of the reasons why I think that adding to the light every week, that has become our Advent tradition, is so powerful to folks, because we ask God to bring more illumination to us, right? So entrance of the light where there is no light is a common theme. Gestation, that, the fact that Jesus came through the growth of the baby in the womb. This is so rich with metaphor, and that gestation period, that the darkness, we talk about the light in the darkness, and yet it took the darkness of the womb in order for something to be born. And so the holy darkness is another way to look at the Advent season, that it's okay. Those places in our lives where there are less light, it's okay, because actually the Spirit is working, the Holy is working and growing within us, even when we can't recognize it. We are becoming full and ready to birth something. So gestation is a really beautiful metaphor for Advent. Anticipation, of course, that waiting. And certainly waiting is, that is just such a typical Advent theme, but it has so many connotations for our lives. How much of our lives do we spend waiting? Waiting for something to happen, waiting for, some of the harder things, like waiting for a diagnosis, waiting to hear what is going to happen next in our lives, waiting for some healing or repairing of a relationship, waiting. Sometimes that waiting is excruciating. And, anticipation is not all fun and games. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's like, oh, can't wait, that kind of feeling. But also sometimes it's really hard. So that, that's that yearning for presence as well. So, as long as we take these theological themes and we immediately begin to think about how that shows up in people's lives, we are going to, that's what bringing the good news is all about, right? It's not the narrative divorced from what we're going through in our lives. The narrative of hope. And that is something humanity is always in need of. But the story of the inbreaking of God through the birth of Jesus Christ is a message that God is ahead of us, right? This is a surprise. That God showed up in human form through a screaming baby. One of the things I love about our Calm and Bright series actually this year is that my wonderful worship design studio associate, who is our expert in children's, in worship and children in worship, Mark Burrows, has created these scripts for the children's time in Calm and Bright. And it always starts out with, okay, silent night, calm and bright. Who are we kidding here? Have you ever been around a baby? And so every week is about how do we soothe a crying baby, which the big metaphor, of course, that some will get, some won't. But for those who have ears to hear, how do we soothe the crying needs of the world? And how do we hear that and answer that and attend to that? So silent night, calm and bright, peace and light, all of that is not to say we just need silence. We need, and certainly that can go the wrong direction in terms of saying we need to silence the cries of the oppressed. That is not about that. It is about maybe those of us who are privileged in society being silent enough to hear the cries of the oppressed, to see Jesus Christ and the cries of the baby in the manger as that metaphorical cry of the most vulnerable in our society, the most oppressed in our society, and paying attention to that. So that surprise that God is ahead of us and God is saying, look, this is what we most need to attend to, the most vulnerable, the most oppressed. And we who have the ability to help make the world a better place, to bring peace and light, that is what we are called to do. So the expectation of justice and peace, this is a very, very strong and much needed message in Advent Christmas. So those are the main theological themes. And just in this 5 minutes that I've been through these, perhaps there's been something that really spoke to you and said, oh, my congregation needs to hear this. So you might begin to brainstorm with that. One of the things that I do when I'm trying to come up with a theme is I will, if I'm honing in on something, I do a circle map process, and I put that in the middle, and then I force myself to think about what are all of the aspects of that, and then more circles out from that, and what are all the aspects of that, and it helps me get deeper and deeper and more ripples, and then something begins to present itself as a main message, and maybe there's a word phrase that begins to pop out at me, and that becomes a possible title, a possible focus, right? So these are some of the things we teach in the Worship Design Studio, and I really outline in Think Like a Filmmaker, Sensory Rich Design for Unforgettable Messages, my latest book. So let's move on, and let me say that those of you who are already Worship Design Studio subscribers, you can get to the material that I am using right now, the theological themes and some of the lectionary work that I have done. All of this is in the Worship Design Studio. You can see this is what you see on your screen where you're in the Worship Design Studio, and down the buttons on the bottom, second from the right, is a button that's called Seasons and Series, and when you click into that, you can see documents for years A, B, and C, and you can click in any one of those and see a lot of material, much more than I can get to in this webinar, but just want you to know where that is. In those, in the Worship Design Studio, you can also listen to podcasts of me brainstorming about the season with 3 other folks: nationally known preacher, nationally known music director, nationally known visual liturgical artist, and myself. And we brainstormed for 4 years. We did this, and all of those recordings are in there. But we came up with tons of ideas. So the Joy Luke Club, right? Because in the Revised Common Lectionary, we're kind of in looking at Luke. Intersections, human and divine, holy darkness, holy light. That's where that whole idea of that gestation comes out. So many different series that we kind of brainstorm about that came out of that. So you can also listen to that podcast in the Worship Design Studio. Now let's take a brief look at the lectionary materials, what's coming out. If you follow the Revised Common Lectionary, we're in year C, starting year C. So in the Hebrew text, and this is the way that I do looking for themes if I'm using the lectionary, and thematic worship and lectionary, following the lectionary, are not antithetical. I do it all the time. And you can find themes throughout. It is just the way that the lectionary was compiled, and you can find those themes. But the way I do it is that I look at all the Hebrew texts, all the Hebrew Bible lections for the entire season. I don't look at one Sunday at a time and look at all of the lections for that Sunday. I look at the whole season, what the Hebrew text is doing as a whole. And then I go through the Psalms, then I go through the epistles, then I go through the Gospels. So let me just show you some of the things that have come out. So in the Hebrew lections, we have a lot across the board around fearing no more, right? Do not be afraid. Our favorite line from angels, right? Salvation, comfort, peace. So that's coming out. We have coming and gathering and bringing, restoring, returning home. You know, the repairer of breaches. All of that is coming out in the Hebrew texts. Singing, rejoicing, and praising, and then offering and sacrifice, giving, fulfilling promise. You know, Advent was in. We had an Advent when the lectionary was compiled, and so it's obvious that the theology of the season affected, and the lectionary reflects that. So no big surprises, right? The psalm texts, truth and mercy, love, trust, righteousness come out. Lead and teach, restore, remember. There's that save, salvation again, give you a name. Praise, exalt, sing. You're saying some of the same things, right? So both in the Hebrew lections and the psalm texts, that singing and praising, I mean, you could do an entire season of just, this giving thanks and singing and praising. The epistle texts Christ is seen as an example, an intercessor. We have Thessalonians and Hebrews and Colossians, and we have several things going on across the season, but there is a lot of Christ as our example coming out in that. Praying and prayer for each other, that comes out really strongly in the epistle text. Now let's look at the gospel text, because most likely, especially in Advent Christmas, we look to these texts and they are very much about that coming. Advent is not just about what happened long ago, the coming of Christ, but also the coming of Christ, the past, present, and future coming of Christ. That eschatological focus is a big part of the theology of the season. And so that coming of the kingdom, watching out. Luke goes on week 2, light in the darkness, or getting ready for the entrance of Christ yet again into human history. John the Baptist is telling people, get ready, there's someone coming. The preaching of John the Baptist is featured again in week 3, bearing fruit. Bear fruit in your lives. This is what is a sign of the kingdom and the things to come. And then, of course, week 4, we have the visit of Mary to Elizabeth, the Canticle of Mary. And then Christmas Eve is the Luke narrative of the birth of Jesus. And then the first Sunday after, we have one Sunday after before we get to Epiphany this year. And Jesus is at the temple as a youngster, and Jesus grows in wisdom and in years and divine and human favor. And so we see that sort of boy Jesus in the Christmas after, or the Christmas Sunday after. In the Worship Design Studio, we have a series that is based on the Revised Common Lectionary Year C, and I called it Testify to Love. And because I saw this sort of testifying to the love that's coming into the world all through it. And so the idea in that one is that we stand up for something. The anchor image in that is a soapbox, right? And so crates, and using crates and you can see here some pictures of lights in crates and various different things that you could do. But to have testimony from people about how love has shown up in their lives and connecting that to the coming of Christ. How love shows up in the world. The Sundays for that, the titles of each one: Righteous Love, Unfettered Love, Liberating Love, Transforming Love. Christmas Eve is Divine Love. And when I actually designed this, there were 2 Sundays after Christmas, so Incarnate Love and Unfailing Love. So that is one of our series in the Worship Design Studio. Those are not, it's not one of the ones that's available a la carte. You have to be a member to get to that series, but that's the one that I did for the Revised Common Lectionary, and the theme that I saw coming out. Testify to Love, of course, is a wonderful song that was made popular by Touched by an Angel TV series, if you can remember that. And it's a wonderful, it's an anthem that your choir can sing and use it as a theme song. So let's look at the narrative lectionary. Year 1 is what we're in. If you don't know what the narrative lectionary, it's a 4-year cycle, not a 3-year. And it goes Genesis to Revelation every year, but it picks scriptures, different scriptures every cycle to get you from beginning to end of the Bible. And so interesting thing in Advent Christmas, you're still in the Hebrew texts for part of it, and then it's only week 4 when you get into the gospel texts. But we have Habakkuk, the prophet, grieved by injustice and the suffering, and watches for God's reply, which of course is an Advent theme, so no stretch there at all, right? Then week 2 is Esther. This, for such a time as this, Esther is made queen, and so that prophetic, that bringing justice, saving God's people kind of message is still there. So week 3, Isaiah, through the Spirit, God's servant will be a light to the nations, bringing release to the prisoners. And of course, this foreshadows Jesus using that scripture in his preaching in the temple, in his ministry. So Matthew, then week 4, the announcement of Jesus' birth to Joseph. Jesus will be Emmanuel. So it's the sense that the place of Jesus, the pronouncement of Jesus' placement in that prophetic lineage, really, that we've set up. Christmas Eve, Luke's account of the birth. which the narrative lectionary usually does every year, uses Luke's account, even though year 1 is in Matthew. And the Sunday after Christmas, back to Matthew, and it's the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And so you can see this sort of lineage thing happening. And frankly, if I was going to do a series based on the narrative lectionary this year, I would focus on that lineage, movements of hope, and connect it to movements, modern day movements of justice and peace, and lifting up the oppressed. Because all of those scriptures are stories of great movements of hope, great prophets, all the way through. Then you get that lineage of Jesus in the Sunday after. So I think that could be really cool. Generations, looking at generations, how generations of movements of hope have moved us toward justice, that arc of justice. But I do actually, in the Worship Design Studio, have a narrative lectionary Cycle 1 series called Into This World. And it's about looking at the picture of the world into which God comes. And through those scriptures, we see the world that God broke into in the person of Jesus, and also looking at our world and how we need that inbreaking of the holy as well. So that is in the Worship Design Studio as well. The Sundays of that is drawn from, I use the titles drawn from the scriptures, the vision made plain for such a time, called for good reason, conceived by the Spirit, no place in the inn, by another route, and a voice was heard. So I hope you're getting some ideas about how series get put together, how an idea for a series can be born. So let's talk a little bit about extended Advent. I had a couple of emails from folks saying, would you please address this, and how do we deal with this in terms of series and creating. So extended Advent, if you've never heard of it, it's kind of a movement that's happened recently. It does assume it's mainly a movement of people who have been using Revised Common Lectionary and looking at how to use the lectionary in an extended Advent where you would begin earlier. The purpose is to give a fuller experience of Advent and Christmas, since a lot of people are out of town after Christmas, or in our culture, we've just kind of lost the importance of the Christmas through Epiphany time. And so we don't get much Christmas theology if we're doing Advent and then, boom, not much Christmas theology. So before the 11th century, when it became 4 Sundays, it was actually 7, and the Revised Common Lectionary still reflects that rhythm. They didn't change the lectionary when they made it 4, so it actually, according to folks who do an extended Advent, does make sense in the lectionary to do this. Now, there's just different approaches. The modest approach is to just start Advent music 2 weeks early before Advent starts. So keep Advent start where it is, but start some Advent music earlier. And then 2 weeks before Christmas, start singing Christmas music. So you get more time of singing Christmas music. Now, this is if you are just really adamant about separating Advent theology and Christmas theology, right? So there's some logic to that. I understand that. I don't have as much of a problem of mixing those a little bit, but the restorationist approach is to start Advent 7 weeks before Christmas, which would be the Sunday after All Saints, and do a 7-week Advent. So that you can get more information about that at the adventproject.org. These are colleagues of mine at the North American Academy of Liturgy who studied this in a small group setting for several years, and they have resources and things if you'd really like to think about a 7-week Advent. The radical approach is to do a 7-week Advent, switch the lectionary all around, and the United Methodist website, Taylor Burton Edwards, put together a lectionary that gets all switched around in order to get Advent and Christmas in all in 7 weeks before Christmas. And that website is uncdiscipleship.org, I believe. So a non-lectionary approach to an extended Advent, perhaps what you could do is do a 4-week series like we have in the Worship Design Studio for Advent, but you might extend it. I know several of you have choir cantatas or children's Christmas pageants or that kind of thing. You could extend it and still have our four weeks, but insert those 2 Sundays in there. So you would start earlier, maybe 6 weeks earlier, or not 6 weeks earlier, but 6 weeks before Christmas, and just extend that out so you could get a whole, the whole series. And what I would say in that is maintain the thematic series items that we offer you, like the connection to mission, like the threshold moment, all those things. Maintain that, even though the bulk of the service might be a pageant or might be a choir cantata. So many different ways to do that extended Advent. I hope that helps for those of you who emailed me, so that you can think about that. All right, so what's in the studio? Let me tell you a little bit about some of the possibilities in the studio, especially for those who are already Worship Design Studio members now, and those who might become. We have two different kinds of series. One is a series that we give you ideas for every week, every worship art. We give you the series title, the titles for every Sunday, a synopsis and scripture for every Sunday. It's all there. Then we give you tons of ideas for every worship art, and then you put it together in your own order of worship, your own script. We don't put the scripts together for you. So we don't choose the music. We just give you a bunch of music to choose from, right? And so with that, we have several for Advent Christmas in the Worship Design Studio. One that's based on the traditions of Christmas. Into This World is that narrative lectionary, one that's called Sacred, seeing the sacred in everything, right? God breaking through. So it's very much about seeing the world as sacramental, which is what sacrament means. God breaks through. Here's Our God. The Journey is based on a book by Adam Hamilton, Odd and Odd. I Believe Even When is inspired by a beautiful anthem by Mark Miller. And then Testify to Love is our Revised Common Lectionary, Year C. So those I sort of akin to Blue Apron series, right? So basically Blue Apron is like one of those food things. I get it because I love it. And all the ingredients come to you and then you put it together. All right. So the other kind of series is that we have fully scripted series we started doing 3 years ago. And so we have 3 of those, and those are free. All of them are in the Worship Design Studio and free if you have a full year subscription to the Worship Design Studio. And we add to those every year. So we have 3 of those now. These are all the scripts, all the music ideas. Of course, you adapt for your context. Visual media ideas, small group suggestions, sermon prompts, children's time scripts. It's just much more concrete material. And a great way, if you're not used to sensory-rich worship, if you need a little boost and you want your worship team to just go full on board and just get an experience of this is a great way to do it. So let me tell you a little bit more about each one of those. In the Worship Design Studio, when you go to our worship series page, which is what you're looking at right now, you can always click on those icons to the right. The top one is called the inspiration page, and that gives you a 1-page synopsis of what that is. Then the ideas, or how you get to the actual ideas. The resources, the one underneath that is called synopses, which is the synopsis for each one of the services, so you can really see exactly what it is. So this is the inspiration page for Calm and Bright. This year, the 200th anniversary of the debut, Silent Night, Holy Night. This hymn has become the best-loved worship moment of many Christians, even those who only come to church once a year. Something mystical occurs as we light our candles and sing the hope of all is calm, all is bright, peace and light for the world. This worship series will celebrate the carol's message over the entire season of Advent and highlight its call for our lives that can guide us all year long. So you see, this is a synopsis that helps you understand what that is. And then these are what I call frames. That's what I call the services. I don't call them Sundays because we also have Christmas Eve in there. So Advent ones, and I pull from each of the verses of Silent Night for this series. Sleep in peace, right? Glory stream from heaven afar. That's the second verse. Redeeming grace is Advent 3. Let us sing is Advent 4. Calm and Bright is the title for Christmas Eve, which is an overarching of all 4 verses, of course, because we're going to sing the whole thing. We also have a brand new, made for this series, anthem that is absolutely gorgeous. And we will be sending out soundtracks, an accompaniment track to all the churches who are doing this series for you to video your choir singing the refrain. And we're going to put it all together in a compilation video that we can send out to the world and send back to you if you'd like to incorporate that in your Christmas Eve service. And then the Sunday after Christmas is Born. So that one is available Of course, free to Worship Design Studio members, and also you can get it a la carte. And I'll show you in just a moment where you can get that. Last year's was called Angels Among Us, and I took 4 stories of the angels appearing to different people in the 4 Sundays. And it said that, we can be messengers of hope. So it's Angels Among Us, # do not be afraid. And in this one, we use social media a lot. You can see this picture that I have up here of churches all over, and they sent us all their pictures. We suggested that you paint angel wings on a backdrop and have people stand in front of it and take a picture of themselves with the angel wings, and then put that all over social media. And so every week was a #, more hope, more peace, more joy, more love, more life. And this was a favorite among people. I cannot tell you, every workshop I do now, every time I go out, people are saying, oh my gosh, we did Angels Among Us, and it was amazing. So if you didn't do it yet, you could also choose that one. That's available a la carte, or of course free in the Worship Design Studio. And the year before that, we did God Bless Us Everyone, The Redemption of Scrooge. And I took as my inspiration a book by my friend Matt Rawl called The Redemption of Scrooge. And it looks at Christmas, past, present, and future. And really asks some of the same questions that in the classic tale, A Christmas Carol, is asked of Scrooge, about how we're living and how we might be redeemed to live into the future in a different way. And so Advent 1 is Bah Humbug, Making Change. Advent 2 is Remembrance of Christmas Past, Hope from Heartbreak. The Life of Christmas Present, Look Upon Me. How are we making the world a better place in our present? Advent 4, the hope of Christmas future, death-defying acts. We can change the future by changing the way we are right now. And Christmas Eve, the redemption of Scrooge, keeping Christmas well, which is a direct line from that story. And the Sunday after Christmas, God Bless Us Everyone. So that was also a favorite. You can see a picture somebody sent us of the gold chains. We invite people to make these links of chain for every family, and one of the at-home things is that you unchain, because at the beginning, Marley is seen in Scrooge's dream chained in the afterlife because of the things he did in his present life. And so you unchain, you unlink every day something you'd like to let go of so that you can live a better life, and then you keep those gold pieces of ribbon that you unchain every day, and you bring them Christmas Eve, and people put them in the manger as this sign that Christ takes upon himself. God takes our cares, our burdens, and transforms them as God transforms the world in the presence of Jesus Christ. So you can get all of those, if you just like to try one of our series. They're $99 each. And so you can get it at worshipdesignstudio.com/Silent Night for the Calm and Bright, the recent one, celebrating the 200th anniversary this year of Silent Night. You can get it /Angels, that was last year's Angels Among Us, and /Scrooge, that's the God Bless Us Everyone. So you can just do those a la carte if you want. Would love to have you try one of those out. It's a great way to get a sense if you need to really sort of jumpstart a more sensory-rich kind of way of worshiping. It's a wonderful way to do it because you can see we have all the prayers, all the leader parts. We suggest that that some readings be done with music underneath, and we teach you how to do that. It's just as specific as I can get to help you get on board with more sensory-rich, more vital worship. So I'd love for you to try that. If you'd like to become a full member, and let me tell you what, this is the best deal because you will have access to all of our series and all of our teaching materials. It's really a training ground for folks. You can go to worshipdesignstudio.com/WDS. And for being on this Advent webinar, I will extend to you a promo code of $50. So you can get $50 off that total price. So it's usually $299 for the year. Take $50 off, it's $249. If you divide that by 52 Sundays, that's a whole year, it's less than a specialty latte at Starbucks or at Pete's or wherever you get your specialty latte. It's less than that per week for all of these resources. So that's a great deal. That code will only be good through October 15th, so go ahead and do that now. And we want you to get going on your Advent plans anyway. So I would love to continue to help you do that. Friends, it's time for us to go. Thank you so much. I pray many blessings for your Christmas, your Advent and Christmas seasons. May you feel the mystery and the wonder and the awe of the presence of the Holy, reconnecting with that. New birth in your life, new birth in our communities and in our world. Many blessings and Merry Christmas. Bye-bye. So Carol asked, I'm just looking in the chat box, and Jenna, before we go off, if you can help me, if I've missed any other questions, can you give some more ideas for weekly rituals or types of things to do to engage the various sensory types? Yes, actually I can. And there are many examples of how we do that in all of our series. But, you know, the examples of lighting candles at prayer, making prayer stations, the examples of the chain links and coming to the altar rail to pray over these chain links in that series. It's about taking the metaphor of the anchor image and making tangible ways to create things to do every Sunday. The bringing up of the mission kits that small groups would have made during the week. Maybe people go home from those small groups with those kits and they bring them up to the manger every week, and so people get to bring those up. Maybe you have those at the door, and even if you didn't make a kit, your extra ones you have for visitors or whomever to bring those up. There's just you know, how do you take the things that you're doing in the series and extend those to actions that you do during worship? So lots of different ways to do that, and of course in every one of our series we have ideas for every Sunday about how that happens. Anthony says, any ideas for a children's pageant, improvised one? Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so let me tell you that when I was living in Lake Tahoe, we had a tiny little church, Sunday morning, maybe 25 people. Right? Small local community. But during Christmas, of course, there's all these visitors because the chapel was actually at Squaw Valley at the ski village. And so 5 services, 500 people, you know. And so we had to improvise. So we just had costumes at the door. And whenever kids came in, they got a costume or whatever. I mean, and we just had, and costumes, not elaborate ones, but, you know, a stick for every shepherd, you know, with maybe a little burlap cape, a little halo for every angel, you know, just enough to cover as many people as many kids as come in the door. And then reading the Christmas story and just inviting kids to come up and just telling them what to do on the spur of the moment. Okay, shepherds, come on up with your shepherd stick. Come on up. And oh my gosh, look up there. There's a star. Everybody go, oh, right? And so you just have fun with it. And so you need a leader who's going to really, you know, be able to inspire that in kids. But yeah, just an improvised one. Just have simple little costumes for them, and have them just sitting wherever they are out there with their parents, and then call them up in different times of the story and have them do spontaneous things. I do have to say that one year, my friend's child was Joseph. Okay, so we did cast the ones who were going to be up there the whole time. He got bored, right? He got bored, which, you know, that happens pretty quickly for some kids. And he went over and there were lights that go up the walls. And he went over and he started spitting on the lights because he could hear it go psst. So Joseph would spend his time spitting on the lights. But, you know, it's something you'll never forget. Okay, so there we go. Let me see if there's any other. Jenna, are there questions?
Not too many other questions about content, but we did have a question asking to remind about the Calm and Bright webinar coming up.
About the what?
The Calm and Bright webinar.
Oh, right. So October 15th, my friends, we're going to have the Calm and Bright Get Ready webinar. So what that means is that by October 15th, you should have had time to look through the scripts, to look through all of our materials, to gather your questions. And then October 15th, I will be on, and we'll have Mark Burrows and Chuck Bell chiming in to help us really with any of your questions, to sort of go over some of the logistics, to help you understand how to adapt to your context. All of those things we'll do on October 15th. I do want to say, for those of you who have already downloaded the scripts and all the materials for Calm and Bright, that the choral anthem of the Made for this series choral anthem still has Proof 2.0 on it, a watermark, because Chuck needed for our pickup choir at the recent last week planning retreat that I did in North Carolina. He needed for us to sing that so that he could see if there were any tweaks he needed to make. And so he will have those done really soon. This weekend, I believe, is the date that he was going to be able to get that to us. He did have some tweaks, so he's going to send us the tweaked version. And we wanted you to see it, but we didn't want you to get the untweaked version confused with the tweaked final version. And so that's why he put that proof on there. So just hang tight. We're in September. It'll be okay. You will get that really soon, and that will happen. And we will also, he's also working on that accompaniment track that we will send out so you can video your choir. And what we want you to do is we want you to do it with Christmas Eve candles in your hands, and kind of a darkish atmosphere, so that we all kind of, it has the same feel when we compile all those videos. All right, so hope that is, so is membership annual? Yes, it is. That's an annual membership, and of course we keep adding resources to that. And I have many churches who just renew annually because they want the new resources that are coming out, also because they have new people who are helping them with visuals, with media, with music, and all the training materials are in there and are a great way to help train your folks. I get to train your folks because a lot of people said, I'd love to have more people helping me, but it's hard to train people. I don't have time, and so sometimes it's just easier to do it myself. So I can take, let's say, your HGTV addicts, people who love design things, and they love designing their homes and that kind of thing, but they have no idea how to do that for a worship service. And you can have them watch a webinar that's in the worship design studio, and they get right away some training for taking that design eye that they have, applying it to worship, and then you all are off and running with your ideas. Okay, I see all kinds of thank yous. Ingrid, your first webinar. I'm so glad that you're on. May there be many more to come. This is one of my favorite things to do in my ministry, friends. So I want to also let you know that at marciamcfee.com, I have a blog. And if you search in that blog for something called Christmas Out of the Box, I have some other ideas for Christmas and Advent that are engaging ways to get the community involved. Labyrinths and a creche collection, bringing and having sort of an exhibit of people's little creche collections, a living Advent wreath, an evening, the Sunday night after Thanksgiving in that big shopping weekend where you wrap people's presents for them and invite them in and have the sanctuary set up in stations, like an Advent wreath to take home devotions that they can have throughout the whole season. Anyway, I just have a ton of ideas in there. So that's another great place to get some ideas.